Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Gramophone Podcast. I'm Martin Cullingford, editor and publisher of Gramophone. And today I'm joined in the Gramophone Podcast studio by Tim Parry, deputy editor of Gramophone and editor of International Piano, and Gavin Dixon, our reviews editor. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Now, it's the end of the year, almost. There's still a couple of podcasts still to come. But the end of the year always feels like a good time to take stock on some of what has happened during the year, which is exactly what our critics do in their Critics' Choice feature. We invite all of our critics and members of the editorial team to name one recording throughout the year that they think is particularly special and they would like to recommend to our readers. So we're going to talk a bit about that and also share the choices we've chosen. But before we do that, it occurs to me that the trio of us gathered here are actually the same trio that gather once a month to discuss our Editor's Choice recordings. And I thought it might just be worth having a few minutes where we just talk a little bit about actually what that process is, perhaps to demystify it slightly and to give listeners and readers a bit of a sense of what it is that we're after. So let's recap. So every month we send out, Gavin, you're the reviews editor. How many records do we send out every month?
Oh, is it 80? Is that correct? Yes, about 80, a good range. Well, what are we looking for? It's a complicated business. We can't review everything, sadly. Obviously, the finest recordings, what we think are going to be considered the finest recordings, get the highest priority from us. Then we have about 40 critics, I think.
Yeah, all specialists in their particular field.
Indeed. And yes, so my job is to look at what's coming out and to assign appropriately to the interests and specialisms of our critics.
Yeah, and so the reviews roll in, and at that point, we all start thinking to ourselves, which ones can we make editor's choices? Now, I know that all three of us do a lot of listening throughout the month as we start preparing for that process. And then we get to the stage where there's usually about, 20, I suppose, Tim, isn't there? We're sometimes as many as that we could consider. And I think the starting point is that the critics obviously have to have liked the record, because no matter what we might personally feel, we certainly don't want to undermine what a critic has said. We kind of want to support their viewpoint. And then we're trying to put together what I feel is both a representation of the very best, but also a real spread of era, of genre, of artist type. What goes through your mind, Tim, when we...
Yeah, I think the first thing is that the first job Gavin has as reviews editor is to identify those reviews that are strong enough to back up an editor's choice selection. So that's usually, I mean, it varies from month to month, but often there's somewhere in the range of 20 to 25 recordings that could fill that gap, and that informs our first tranche of listening. And then we want to achieve a spread of period, of genre. There are clearly some months where we wish we had 15 choices, not the 10 that we have. And there are other months where actually the choice almost selects itself from the strength of the reviews. So clearly something not being an editor's choice does not mean that in a different month it wouldn't have been, and it's not worthy of people's attention. It's really just a starting point.
Yeah. And it's always a difficult thing. And maybe we'll come on to this perhaps when talking about critics' choice, but what both of you are you listening for in a record? What makes that record really stand out to you as something you want to recommend to our readers?
I think you have to have a sense of the artist's personality. That's a really hard thing to achieve without... It's a fine balance between wanting an artist identifying with the music, so what you're hearing is the music, not the artist, but to feel that it's not anonymous. This is actually a specific artist or artists who are performing this music and recording it. And so I think that sense of distinctive personality is important. I think there's no question that the quality of the recorded sound is important, because I think, not least, that actually informs your perception of the performances themselves. It's quite a subtle thing. There are all sorts of recordings where the sound may not be quite right, and it's very easy to blame the performance for it, but actually it comes down to the engineering. And it's less common, but you can have it the other way around, where very good engineering slightly flatters a record, and then you can end up going and hearing somebody live, and then it wasn't quite as good as you thought it was going to be from a recording. But that's less common, I think. So a good recorded sound is important, and that's one of the things that will make any listener, I think, want to keep returning to a record. It's not always important, but I think the quality of the music itself, you can have sort of Division 2 music which is played with such strong advocacy that you want to go and listen to it and rehear it. But equally, there is great music, sometimes great discoveries that we want to tell readers about. I think if there's a new recording of Beethoven symphonies or something, it's going to have to be really very good to be an editor's choice, because there's so much competition out there. But there's quite if you're recording something which is less often done, and you're actually making a case of this being one of the best versions available, that's got more chance of being an editor's choice.
Yeah, and conversely, I'm always very open to being supportive of something that is new to me. And occasionally that might be something from older repertoire that hasn't been recorded or I haven't heard. But I know that we're always very conscious that we ought to have some contemporary music in there. We want to have something which is going to be a surprise to all of us.
And early music, early and contemporary. It's very easy, I think, we find with often the wealth of things that get sent out, but also the strength of the reviews that come in. It's very easy for us to end up with a very 19th century list of, short list, if you like. Yeah. And we do want to have a balance. So there is at least some early music and some, we say contemporary, but what we really mean is anything from the mid 20th century.
Yeah. And after Editor's Choice, there's another stage, of course. Once a year, we have the Gramophone Awards, and every Editor's Choice goes into the first round. But I think it's also worth saying that any record that's got to that final stage of us sitting down and having a very serious discussion about what should be included also goes through to the first round. Really just to reflect what you said earlier, that in some months you wish you had 15 choices, but a difficult decision has to be made.
Absolutely. So the first round, and we should also add, I think, that all of our critics are sent that long list. So any critic can add any other disc they like to that round one list. So we want to make sure at that stage that nothing is overlooked that somebody might want to advocate for. And that's almost, I think, the point at which we started doing that a couple of years ago and adding those records. Many, many fewer recordings were added by the critics themselves. Lots of them felt that covered actually most of the really good things that were worth considering. So that seemed to be a good starting point. And that makes our long list for the round one voting.
And of course, what that last bit of the process also does is, whereas an editor's choice needs to have been positively supported by the critic in that issue, not every critic will agree about every record. So it means that if a critic hasn't particularly liked a record, another critic can still put it through to the awards. And so everything that anyone feels should be considered gets in there. So the awards themselves...
If I may give one example of that... in this year's awards, there was the set of Ionescu symphonies on Deutsche Grammophon, which had a rather lukewarm review originally, and about 4 different people. Therefore, we didn't consider it for an editor's choice because the review didn't really back that up. But about 4 different people then proposed that it should go through into the round one, and then it comfortably sailed into round 2, and it came second. So clearly, the general consensus among the reviewers was much more positive than the original review that we published. So ideally nothing should slip through the net. It should be the case that we can capture anything. And so one reviewer's view of a record, which is ultimately what we print as our review, it doesn't have to be the only voice on the recording.
Well, I hope the one thing everyone will take away from what feels like quite a complex discussion is that any accolade that Gramophone gives of any type to any record has a lot of thought and a lot of listening behind it. However, our annual Critics' Choice feature is a real point where a critic has to just focus on one record. It's a personal decision, and it is their particular choice. So why don't I start with my choice, which is an album called Songs of Passion, an exploration of the music of Dowland and Purcell, from Leah DeSandra, the superb mezzo-soprano, Thomas Dunford, the equally superb lute player, and his ensemble Jupiter, and that is on the Orato label. I've named those artists, but actually there are also some lovely appearances on there by friends of theirs, and increasingly friends of our pages too, rising stars such as Jess Dandy, Hugh Montagu, Rendell, and others. Now, I just love this album. There's a really wonderful sense of these works rooted both in their time of historic performance and courtly life, but they're performed so engagingly that they feel to me just like songs of any era, of our era, really, expressing love, joy, sadness, and everything in between. I just find DeSandra brings such a personal, characterful voice to this music. She's almost like an actor. She's somehow free with the music, while also absolutely spot on too with what it's asking and expecting of her. The ensemble and Dunford's lute playing is on brilliant form, whether in Dowland's sometimes more downbeat style or his dance style. The King of Denmark's Galliard is a superb toe-tapping example there. The personal half of the programme features excerpts from The Fairy Queen and Dido and Aeneas, the famous Dido's Lament included, of course. This is music of a century later, but it all feels very much of a piece here with the Dowland. The evening hymn here is particularly beautiful. Overall, it's just a very lovely recording. I really enjoyed it, and I urge you to sit down over Christmas with a drink, the sun setting outside perhaps, and enjoy it too.
I was very glad you chose this record, Martin. It's an absolute gem of an album. And actually, I was slightly surprised no one else had chosen it. This is one we did make an editor's choice earlier in the year. Going back to what we were talking about before, the first thing that certainly that struck me about this record is just a wonderful recorded sound. The music making is so expressive, but it all sounds so vivid and rich. And that's something which, if the sound were less good, it'll the strength of these performances would not shine in the way that they do. It's an absolutely gorgeous recording. I love the reduction of Dido and Aeneas with only, I think, is it 5 movements from it, and obviously it's never going to replace a complete performance of that, but in this context it really works, and it's absolutely beautifully done. So it's a great record.
It's not the only Dido and Aeneas in our critics.
It's not.
No. There's the full longer version too.
Very, very different.
But I'm surprised the reduction isn't done often, because actually it's just great music.
I guess it's not a very long opera anyway, but yes, in this context, having had all that Dowland, it works really well.
Excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak. Shall I call her good when she proves unkind? Or the stiff fires which vanish into smoke? Must I praise the leaves where no fruit I find? No, a shadow's doom for body stand. Always be the music
some Dowland from that superb album, Songs of Passion, from Leah Desandra, Thomas Dunford and Jupiter on the Orato label. Now, Gavin, on to your choice.
So my choice was the Requiem by Cristobal de Morales, performed by De Profundis and Eamon Duggan. So Morales was a Spanish Renaissance composer of the first half of the 16th century, and this is probably his most famous and most recorded work. But that doesn't matter at all. So this is repertoire where there's been a move in recent decades towards smaller ensembles, mixed ensembles, and a higher pitch convention as a result. But this new recording goes back to the older ways. You could say authentic in the sense that it's what the composer would have known, but I'm not going to go too far in that direction. But yes, so it's a large male voice choir. The size of the choir gives the sound sort of weight and profundity, but it's done so professionally that the ensemble isn't compromised. It still remains fluid. It's somber music, but it's expressive, and it's sort of music at the time when a sense of harmony is coming into the counterpoint, and that is really represented here. A fantastic performance, and again, fantastic sound quality. It's just, everything works for me in this recording.
St Jude's Hampstead. Yeah, no, it's a great recorded sound. The other thing about it is they sing it at Renaissance pitch, so it's transposed down a fourth, and it helps to give that music that extra richness and all male voice. They're fantastic. Well, I mean, of course, Eamon Duggan is very well known to anybody who listens to the 16. He's a very experienced singer and increasingly a conductor, music director, and he gets one wonderful, as you say, very professional but wonderful ensemble. It's a great group of singers.
Yeah. And it's probably worth mentioning that this is volume 2 in a complete recording of the Morales Masses, which I think will come to 10 albums or something in that region. So there's plenty more to come.
And I think just on the subject of Renaissance music like this, a lot of it will be anew to a lot of people. Do you think this is an example of someone who perhaps want to explore this area repertoire, expand their knowledge beyond perhaps the Tallis or the Palestrina they might know? It's a sort of great representation of actually what was going on at that point of time and actually how they might just think differently about this extraordinary but still very much undiscovered area of the repertoire?
Well, historically, he's a composer you could consider transitional. I mean, the most important Spanish composer before Victoria, who's a very great composer as well, and also very much worth exploring, but also a composer from the south at a time when Josquin de Prez and the Low Country polyphony was more prevalent and remains more famous today. So, yeah, in a sense, there are other names and perhaps more famous names in this period of the Renaissance. But yeah, certainly worth exploring and certainly worth hearing on its own terms.
I think this is a record which really could get people who don't consider themselves early music specialists listening to this music. The early music specialists, as you've alluded to, I mean, this is Morales' most famous work, most recorded work. But in a sense, for lots of people, it'll still be new to them. And this is a very good way of exploring it.
Oh, and also the Requiem Mass is it less than half of the album, and a fantastic selection of funerary motets have been collected to frame the piece and to intersperse the movements. And it's a great program. It doesn't feel like filler at all, and it's a different side to the composer's art. Even though they're funerary, they're a bit brighter, not quite as liturgical. Yeah, it all adds up.
Great program and a very fine album. And that was an excerpt from the Requiem by Morales, recorded by De Profundis, conducted by Eamon Duggan, and that was on the Hyperion label. Now, Tim, tell us about your choice.
Well, I've gone for the Piano Concerto by Sir Michael Tippett. It's a live recording from Stephen Osborne with the London Philharmonic Orchestra and Edward Gardner. Now, Stephen Osborne recorded the Piano Concerto back in 2007, a studio recording for Hyperion with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, a recording made in Glasgow with Martin Brabbins. The thing that separates this out is, to start with, again, we've said this more than once, but it's the recorded sound. This is a much better sound than is on that Hyperion studio recording. And it really brings a vividness, a sense of sort of visceral quality, feels very live. I think Stephen Osborne is probably the greatest living advocate of this piece. He's played it for more than 2 decades. He absolutely lives with this music, and it really shows. And I think this is probably the go-to recording of this work that's now available. And it comes with a super recording of the Second Symphony, which again feels very tight. Again feels live. Feels lived in the moment. It's a super record, and I think that what still stands out on that Hyperion record is the recording of the 4 piano sonatas. But for the concerto, I think this now supersedes it.
Yeah, and I think we should certainly dwell on Tippett for a few minutes more in a moment. But before we do that, just the artists on this record, Stephen Osborne, Edward Gardner, they've become 2 figures who I feel are one of the most sort of accomplished and actually quite important artists for recording at the moment. There's an awful lot of records over the last 10 or so more years. And Stephen Osborne, I first remember his Van Regards from Hyperion about 20 years ago. It's the first point I became very aware of him. But Edward Gardner, month after month, there seems to be something, slight exaggeration, there's something coming out of the LPO across a breadth of repertoire that actually just seems to excel. And not just the LPO for him as well, whether it's Bergen or Norwegian opera. So 2 names here who are just right at the core of recording excellence in our modern time.
They're such great musicians, and they're so highly respected within their own profession. Clearly, people love working with both of them, and it's evident they love working together. Absolutely, and as you say, versatile.
But let's talk about Tippett, because actually Tippett appears quite a few times in our Critics' Choice feature.
Yes, I was one of 3, I think, who chose Tippett. David Thresher chose the recording of New Year, the first recording of pretty much unrecordable opera, I think it was always thought to be, which again made the shortlist of the opera category this year and did very well. I think that's a recording which many people on our recordings panel was just so thrilled to hear it. So he's chosen that, and Geraint Lewis chose another Edward Gardner recording, A Child of Our Time.
Just like to mention at this point, Edward Gardner in the LPO with A Midsummer Marriage, which won a Gramophone Award, is it 2 years ago?
Indeed, absolutely.
And it's fantastic. It's just wonderful. So it's Gardner in the LPO. That's a winning team for Tippett at the moment, definitely.
Yeah. No, he's, I think, probably one of the strongest advocates for Tippett's music, actually, that we have at the moment, certainly on record.
Yeah.
Stephen Osborne playing Tippett's Piano Concerto. That's with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Edward Gardner on the LPO label. And just before we move on from the feature, are there any other particular trends that emerge from it? The one I would point to is the amount of extraordinary young artists on there. There's a lot of records made by some of the most established names, but then we also have Le Coeur et la Raison from Lana Reid, Ellis Island from Julia Hamos, Refound from the countertenor Hugh Cutting. I've already talked about the Dowland and Purcell from Leah DeSandra and Thomas Dumford. And it does seem to be that anyone who's even remotely worried about the nature of recording only has to look at a list like this and actually just see some very innovative, very interesting records. And I've only named a few of them coming out of artists from the younger generation.
And I might add to that a selection from David Fanning I found particularly interesting, which Pavel Klesnikov and Samson Soy, their piano duet recording Bright of Spring. So David Fanning asked the very fair question, can a piano duet be truly exciting? And we think of the piano duet as an essentially domestic genre, of the kind that when readers get our January issue, they'll see a very nice review of a Schubert duet album from Bertrand Chameau and Leif Ove Ansens, which is a super record. But that's what you think of when you think of a piano duet. This is not like that at all. Stravinsky Rite of Spring is viscerally exciting, done as and it's often done on two pianos. This is done on one piano, and the recorded sound is so immediate and in your face. It is, in fact, I think for some people probably too much so. It's very gritty, and but it's genuinely exciting, and that's what led David to ask the question. It's an interesting choice.
Absolutely.
The other thing I might add is only one duplication across. This is unusual. Usually there are 2 or 3 records which come out as being nominated by at least 2 people, and I think on this occasion only one duplication, and even that feels a slightly out the way record, the Weldon Judgment of Paris, which clearly piqued the interest of 2 of our panel, but no other duplications at all.
Well, there we are. What better evidence can there be of the sheer breadth and diversity of records being released? So, thank you to Tim Parry, to Gavin Dixon, to all our reviewers who have contributed so much to Gramophone this past year, and to all of you, our readers and our listeners. We are so very grateful for your support, and a very happy Christmas to each and every one of you. And to close, another excerpt from that superb album Songs of Passion, with Leah DeSandra singing Purcell's Evening Hymn. I hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Gramophone Podcast. If you have, there are more than 500 episodes to discover in our archive. Just search for Gramophone wherever you get your podcasts. Do please subscribe to future episodes, or even consider leaving a rating or a review. We're very grateful, and it really helps others to find our work. And if you'd like to subscribe to Gramophone magazine itself, or indeed to any of our sister titles, Choir and Organ, International Piano and Opera Now, you can currently find some very special Christmas offers at our website, gramophone.co.uk. It would make a wonderful Christmas present to a loved one, or even to yourself. And do look out for another Gramophone podcast next week.